Now, to introduce the connective tissues, we have several different categories of connective tissues. Loose connective tissue has its fibers, small thin fibers between the cells, and most of these tissues right here, these first three categories, the cell type is called a fibroblast, and those cells produce fibers, and in the case of loose connective tissues, they're very fine fibers, and they're arranged in various directions with a lot of space between. So it's kind of the more fluffy type. There's more space in there. Of course, it's filled with water, not air or anything. Dense, irregular connective tissue has fibers that are gathered together in bundles, larger numbers of collagen fibers together in the dense, irregular connective tissue, but they're still kind of irregularly arranged. They run in different directions within the tissue. Dense, regular connective tissue, as it sounds, the fibers run regularly. They're in one direction in parallel, the collagen fibers within that. So all three of these have collagen fibers making up the bulk of the material. There are some other fiber types that are still collagen based but have different names in loose connective tissue we'll look at. But anyway, primarily collagen fibers, either very fine fibers loosely arranged. Dense, irregular is heavier fibers that are still irregularly arranged, and then dense, regular connective tissue. And we'll see examples of all these. Loose connective tissue, sometimes called areolar connective tissue. The next term here, adipose, fat tissue, is going to be very different from these other types, but is usually found in association with these other types, with loose or dense irregular connective tissue in the body. These cells, the fat cells, are large cells that are filled with triglycerides for the most part, and they pack tightly together. There are no significant fiber component in that tissue, and little extracellular material space. By the way, the extracellular material space in these connective tissues we refer to as a matrix. So these first categories here, we're going to lump them together in what we call connective tissue proper. These are mainly like space fillers in between one structure and another. They're not structural in themselves. They just kind of hold stuff together. Adipose is a unique and completely different kind of thing, but it's kind of grouped in here because it's not the kind of special connective tissues we associate with structures or the blood. So the next three down here, well, the rest of these, are considered special connective tissues. Hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, fibrocartilage, and bone are all structural. Blood, of course, is not. It's still a special connective tissue. So hyaline cartilage and elastic cartilage and fibrocartilage have the same basic material. The cell type we find here is called a chondrocyte. Remember, we had fibroblasts make up the cell types you find in these connective tissues: loose, dense, and dense irregular. In hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage, it's always a chondrocyte, and it's always a cell that's found occupying a little cavity space surrounded by another kind of matrix material. It's a very plastic-like material in hyaline cartilage. In elastic cartilage, you mix that plastic-like material with elastic fibers, and in fibrocartilage, you mix that elastic-like material with collagen fibers in there. Bone matrix has a completely different makeup, and we'll talk more about that when we get to it. And blood, of course, is a different thing entirely. So we're going to go through each of these and consider what they consist of and where they are found in the body. Those are our connective tissues. Loose connective tissue, our first connective tissue proper. First, we're going to do a little drawing of what it's kind of made up of physically within the tissue, and then we'll talk about where you might find it in the body. The cell type that makes up the loose connective tissue is called a fibroblast, and I'm going to draw some fibroblast cells in here, just a couple of them, to give you some idea of what a fibroblast might look like. So these are fibroblast cells. They're usually elongated, and the nucleus is also somewhat elongated. Longer and narrow oval shapes making up the tissues here. I've drawn them kind of close together. I probably should have scattered them out more. They produce fibers. They're fibroblast cells. They produce fibers. The main fiber type we think of when we think of fibroblasts is a collagen fiber. So this is going to represent a collagen fiber. Right here. I'll represent that going behind that. And they go in different directions, so let's draw one that comes in through here. So anyway, collagen fibers. In addition to collagen fibers, you may find elastic fibers in loose connective tissue. And where you see elastic fibers, it's common to see that they have kind of a wavy look to them, so I'll draw a couple of elastic fibers in there. Sometimes you'll find in here what we call reticular fibers. I'm going to make it in green. I'll just do a little bit of reticular because usually you don't see the reticular fibers in the loose connective tissue. Some places it's almost all reticular fibers in like a lymph node or something of that sort. But in general, you're not going to see much of this going on, but anyway, that's reticular fiber. A reticulum is a network, so you see this branching pattern in reticular fibers. And the rest of the space in there that's not a cell or a fiber is taken up by a watery fluid, sometimes more of a sticky-like, sap-like fluid, but anyway. So let's label a few things here. We know we've got fibroblasts. Make up the cells of the native cell of the tissue. We've got collagen fibers. We have elastic fibers. And we have reticular fibers. Mostly, though, you see the collagen fibers, the main fiber in most loose connective tissues, with maybe some elastic fibers in there, and rarely would you see the reticular fibers in the tissue. So anyway, and then everything outside of that, all that white space in between everything, we can call it ground substance. You can call it extracellular matrix. There's another word I'm not thinking of right now for it, but anyway, that has other names. So this is found immediately underneath the epidermis. It's what's called the papillary layer of the dermis. Papillary layer of the dermis. Immediately underneath the epithelial layer, the epidermal layer, just beneath the epidermis, you'll find part of the dermis that is loose connective tissue. It's fairly thin zone in there before you get to the deeper dermis, which is going to be dense irregular connective tissue. You find it also in a layer of the gut wall we call the lamina propria. Again, it's immediately underneath the epithelium of your gut, and some of your other internal structures as well that have an epithelium. Immediately beneath the epithelium, there's a supporting network of loose connective tissue. So what in any of the internal organs, the hollow internal organs having respiratory, digestive, urinary, reproductive system, there's going to be a lamina propria connective tissue supporting the epithelium that lines the cavity in there. And then just filling in between structures. It's often associated with adipose tissue as well, supporting the adipose tissue. So that's loose connective tissue. Dense irregular connective tissue, I've already drawn a couple of fibroblast cells for my picture of dense irregular connective tissue. Here, instead of having the fine collagen fibers that go through there, your collagen is going to be arranged in bundles, thick bundles. And this is where I need a fatter marker because I need to make a lot of lines here to make all the collagen in a thick bundle for your dense irregular connective tissue. So you have these bundles of fibers that run through here in different directions. Put a little bit of a wave in it, just because it's fairly common to see. They're not exactly straight. So heavy bundles of collagen going in different directions through the tissue. You don't see the elastic fibers and the reticular fibers here. You do have some fluid space in between things, so label fibroblasts. Bundles of collagen fiber. And then the interstitial space where we have our ground substance. Filling in the rest of our matrix. Remember that all the extracellular material, the fluid space in fibers, that makes up the matrix of the tissue. So that's dense irregular connective tissue. This is found throughout the rest of your dermis. Remember, your papillary layer of your dermis had loose connective tissue. This is what we call the reticular layer of our dermis. Reticular portion of the dermis. Also in the gut wall again, but not next to our loose connective tissue so much, well, sometimes. We have a layer that's called the submucosa of the gut. Submucosa layers in our inner organs, lying beneath the mucosal membranes of some of our tubes and passages inside our body. Again, between some structures, you may find some dense irregular connective tissue. Our next example, dense regular connective tissue. You will have collagen fibers that run in a straight line. Okay, now dense regular connective tissue. I'm going to draw I think I'll draw the collagen fibers here in orange instead of red so that it shows up a little bit better. But here the collagen fibers are going to be fairly heavy, thick structures, more similar, I guess, to the dense irregular. So you have a large, thick bundle of collagen going here between the cells. So you have these cells situated in parallel rows between the collagen. And here, so here, this would be one row of collagen right along here. And these go on and on and on. They're very long. You don't see them cut short like you do in the dense irregular connective tissue. So you've got these long collagen bundles in the tissue right up next to the cells, and then they'll go, here's the next one, next row of collagen material. So these large heavy fibers of collagen, made from a lot of collagen side by side really, but anyway, they run in parallel. Sometimes they have a more wavy appearance than this straight like I'm drawing them here, but whenever a tendon or ligament is stretched tight, it gives more of this kind of look. So it doesn't really leave any space between the fibers and the fibroblasts for fluid, that extracellular fluid matrix we saw in the others. So we have here just parallel rows of collagen and then fibroblast cells. Collagen and fibroblast cells, and as I mentioned, this makes up your tendons and ligaments. And I'm reminded as I do that, I did forget one thing when I was doing the dense irregular connective tissue and made the list there of components. Many of your body capsule, your organ capsules, I should say, many of your organs are surrounded with a dense irregular connective tissue. From bone to liver to kidney and so on, you've got a dense irregular connective tissue that surrounds many of the organs, not made of dense regular, but dense irregular connective tissue. Here, just tendons and ligaments. Of course, tendons connect your muscle to your skeleton, and ligaments connect one bone to another at the joints, typically, where the bones are joined together. So they're both connecting to bone, either bone to muscle or bone to other bones, and they're tendons and ligaments. Adipose, or fat tissue now. The cells of adipose tissue, fat tissue, are very large and rounded in shape, and they kind of fit together like bubbles that have come together. So this is just ordinary adipose tissue. The nucleus and actually most of the cytoplasmic material of the cell, all the organelles and parts of the cell, are pushed off toward the sides of the cell, toward the outer membrane, because the center is filled with adipose, the fatty material that's stored in the cell. So your nucleus looks like a rather small part, off in a corner somewhere. So anyhow, these are our adipose cells. We're showing their nuclei here. The important thing to note here is that we don't see any fibers, and there's no space, no matrix space much between the cells, not room for any other material in here. So the lack of matrix is a key feature here, and like I said, the center of the cell contains triglycerides. So these are fat cells, sometimes called adipocytes. So there's an adipocyte or fat cell. There are some places in your body, and well, some places where you have what's called brown fat. Brown fat. In brown fat, they're just a little bit different in their appearance. The cells will be usually a little bit smaller, and instead of having just one mass of triglyceride taking up the center of the cell, you're going to see inside a number of smaller vesicles of triglycerides. Inside the cell, and these are often found in association with other types of fat. And these are known to be very important to animals that, like bats, that need to generate heat suddenly. They let their body temperature go down during the day when they're in a cage somewhere, and then when they need to get active at night, they start burning up their brown fat. They can increase their body temperature very rapidly. So it helps with small animals that need to boost their body temperature in a hurry. So anyway, that's brown fat, but most of our fat is just ordinary adipose tissue. Now we're into our connective tissue proper, our cartilages. First of all, we'll look at hyaline cartilage, our first example of a cartilage. And let me do this in brown here. Within the cartilage matrix, when you think about hyaline cartilage, you think about the kind of plastic-like material at the end of a chicken leg bone in there. I'm trying to think of other places where you can't find it. That's the most commonly encountered, I think, bit of hyaline cartilage is at the end of a chicken leg. But it's that plastic-like material at the joint there. Inside hyaline cartilage, that plastic-like material is fairly solid and uniform, but within that are cavities called lacunae. So anyway, these bubble-like spaces I'm drawing here, these circles represent lacunae or cavities in the matrix. So all this material outside here, this is all matrix, and inside of the lacuna, you'll find your cartilage cells. Sometimes there's a couple of cells in one space. So anyway, these are cartilage cells, and they're called chondrocytes. Chondrocytes. In our loose connective tissue, dense irregular connective tissue, and dense irregular connective tissue, the important cell type was called a fibroblast. In fat, it's the adipocyte, and here in the cartilage, it's a chondrocyte. So these are chondrocyte cells in lacunae, and in between the lacunae, there's this matrix material. It's sometimes referred to, hyaline means glassy. So it's kind of like under the microscope, when it's stained, it has just a slight pinkish color to it, but it's very uniform in its color. Maybe it'll kind of like smoked glass a little bit. But anyway, so there's a chondrocyte in lacuna. A single space there with a single cell, single chondrocyte. in a single lacuna. Outside of that, we have our hyaline matrix. Our glassy matrix out there. So that's basically all there is to the hyaline cartilage. No fibers to deal with. There's a fair amount of matrix material out here, extracellular material. Anyway, that's hyaline cartilage. Now, where do you find it? Classic identified locations for hyaline cartilage. Your nasal cartilage is out there shaping your nose. So nasal cartilage, I'll abbreviate that with C-A-R-T. Nasal cartilage in your trachea, your windpipe, supporting your windpipe, you have a lot of it there. I've already mentioned the ends of your bones, ends of your long bones. At the joint, a place where the two bones meet and articulate is made softer and smoother by being this more plastic-like material, not bone itself. So the ends of the long bones, you'll find it there. So those are some of the places where you'll find hyaline cartilage. So now we're doing elastic cartilage, and initially it's going to look a lot like our hyaline cartilage in my picture here. We're going to have chondrocytes in lacunae. We'll put some nuclei in the cells here. But we're going to add elastic fibers in the hyaline matrix. So we've got chondrocytes in lacunae. And then we have basically a hyaline matrix type material in between here. And we're going to add to that elastic fibers. And the elastic fibers are very small, wavy fibers that extend through the tissue in different directions. And it's a little hard to do this on the board here, but there would be hundreds and hundreds in this small space that I've got to work with. Not the few elastic fibers that I'm drawing here. But anyways, got quite an abundance of elastic fibers that extend through all of the matrix, so embedded in that hyaline or plastic-like matrix of the tissue. So again, chondrocytes in lacunae. And then elastic fibers in hyaline matrix. Your outer ear, your external ear, and the ear canal are made of elastic cartilage. That's supportive material that gives shape to your ear canal and your external ear. And it can be found also in the epiglottis. The epiglottis, which is a small flap that covers your opening to your windpipe when you swallow. So your throat goes up and pushes against that epiglottis flap so food doesn't enter when you swallow. So those are three locations where you find elastic cartilage. So here we are looking at fibrocartilage. Again, we have chondrocytes in lacunae. I've drawn in several chondrocytes. We'll put their nuclei in here. And instead of having elastic fibers running through here, we're going to have thicker collagen fibers running through the tissue. Not usually too random in direction. Usually they kind of run in the same plane, same general direction through the fibrocartilage in most views. Kind of weaving through between the chondrocytes in a pattern something like this. There'd still be a fair amount of that hyaline cartilage matrix out in between things. And here we have the chondrocyte in a lacuna. We have collagen fiber bundles. And we have, that's in basically a hyaline matrix. Where do I want to label that? Hyaline matrix. So that's our fibrocartilage composition. This is often found where dense connective tissue meets hyaline cartilage, kind of between hyaline cartilage and dense connective tissue. You'll see this arrangement. So it would be fibroblasts and collagen fibers up here maybe, and then it gets into the chondrocytes with some hyaline material, and then as you go on through this, you might lose your collagen fibers and have only a zone of hyaline cartilage down below without any collagen fibers down below. So anyway, it's often found in that kind of interface between dense connective tissue and hyaline cartilage. Some places in the body where you might find this, the pubic symphysis. Between your vertebrae and your intervertebral discs. And in the menisci of the knee. The knee meniscus is a little pad of cartilage that surrounds where your two rounded components of your knee joint meet there to kind of stabilize that point where the two bones interact at that joint. So that's fibrocartilage. That finishes our three cartilage categories. Next will be bone.